What's on your radar, Bree?
Well, Robbie, from the first thread, the importance of the Twitter files has been clear to anyone paying attention. The first release, reported by independent journalist Matt Taibbi, detailed requests from powerful politicians and celebrities to delete tweets and have Twitter impose their censorious whims. And a pattern of requests from the Biden team were highlighted as especially pernicious. Although from that very first drop, Taibbi was clear that both the Trump White House and the Biden White House took advantage of what he described as tools for controlling speech. Taibbi was clear that the system was not balanced. As he wrote, it was based on contacts because Twitter was and is overwhelmingly staffed by people of one political orientation. There were more channels, more ways to complain, open to the left, well, to Democrats, than the right. This, according to Taibbi, resulted in a slant in content moderation decisions. And the most visible mistake made by Twitter was censoring the Hunter Biden laptop story as fake news, despite the fact that internal emails show that Twitter moderators did not believe the story violated Twitter's own guidelines. As I said, the significance of this reporting has been obvious to anyone paying attention. Not only was it a newsworthy story involving a presidential candidate's family suppressed in the lead up to a general election, additional Twitter file reporting revealed the following: that Twitter quietly assisted the Pentagon's covert PSYOP operations, that the pharmaceutical industry lobbied Twitter to shape content around vaccine policy, and that secret shadow banning of subversive accounts was rampant. But despite the newsworthiness of this reporting, many in mainstream media either ignored the Twitter files, dismissing it as a nothing burger, or they made ad hominem attacks against the journalists involved in an effort to undermine the relevance of their reporting. The reason for this political deflection seems obvious. As Matt Taibbi put it, the clear slant he observed in his review of the Twitter files was distinctly to the left. Liberals, inconvenienced by the revelation, simply had no interest in covering them. And they wonder why confidence in and viewership of liberal media is on the decline. Now, while I disagree with the calculated liberal disinterest in the Twitter files, I have had some concerns about the methodology used in the searches. The posture of the disclosure by Elon Musk is unique here. Typically whistleblowers have a more hostile relationship to their employers, and the documents they leak are confidently understood to be exposing some unpleasant fact about their employers, about the institution, that they prefer the public not to know. In this case, then richest man on earth, Elon Musk, purchased Twitter after voicing concerns about freedom of expression on the app. He then used his position as CEO to make internal documents available to journalists of his choosing, and as the process went on, other journalists recommended to him by those journalists he initially selected. So he has an obvious interest in exposing the wrongdoing of his predecessors. Unlike a traditional whistleblower, however, he also has an interest in preserving the financial viability of his own multi-billion-dollar company. And as someone who has openly articulated a preference for conservative politics and whose personal brand is increasingly associated with more right-leaning public figures, he also has an obvious interest in making public those documents that confirm his perception that Twitter isn't just censorious, but that it has been targeting the right. Now, it's perfectly possible that that's the truth. I think Taibbi is obviously right that Twitter's staff and leadership has historically been left-leaning. And the obvious malfeasance with respect to the Hunter Biden laptop story seems to confirm that Twitter's biggest mistake was one that disadvantaged conservatives. And again, that's no nothing burger. At the same time, as a leftist, I have been curious whether the journalists have been as interested in running searches on the documents that might confirm what many on the left, who have been as or more antagonistic to the Democratic Party as Trump or Republicans, have felt. That Twitter is biased against all anti-establishment figures, including leftists. When asked, Taibbi, who identifies as left-leaning and in the past supported figures like Bernie Sanders, he said he honestly hasn't come across much in the way of left censorship. But a pattern of deplatforming and shadow banning of left figures that all of us have observed made it hard for many in the online left community to believe that. After all, it was Bernie supporters who were targeted by Hillary Clinton's Correct the Record troll farms that were funded to the tune of $1 million. They since became the K-Hive troll. Both right and left anti-war activists have been swarmed by pro-Ukraine Nazi-affiliated NAFO trolls who made memes, including the N-word and cotton fields, that filled my mentions for days after I interviewed and disagreed with a pro-intervention guest on my podcast. And given the left's understanding of how power works, that there is a bipartisan corporate consensus that weaponizes its power to extract wealth from the working class and thwart populist movements at any cost, I felt suspicious that the coverage was so one-sided. And given my experience conducting document review processes as a corporate lawyer for 6 years, I was also more skeptical about the document disclosure process than the journalists involved in the Twitter files seemed to be. You see, one of the key tasks corporate lawyers engage in, at least junior associates like myself, was to comb through thousands and thousands of documents that might expose your client legally. You are required to turn over documents in the context of a lawsuit that are responsive to specific document requests made by your opposing counsel. There are some exceptions to what you have to disclose, including privileged communications between clients and their attorneys. But much of the litigation process is consumed with debates over what each side can fairly request and whether they can exclude other kinds of documents. For example, can we exclude various date ranges, or can we exclude personal emails? Can you filter out emails that include a personal email like a Gmail address? Or is there a case to be made that because a client sometimes emailed things to their Gmail, you can't actually exclude all personal email? Is the client searching their entire document database? Were files deleted in anticipation of litigation? I mean, there's a whole industry built up around document forensics to ensure that corporations don't lose legal loopholes to withhold documents that could provide evidence of their own wrongdoing. So, when I hear the Twitter files journalists say that they're confident they were able to search everything because the search results they requested were returned to them very quickly, too quickly to say filter out inconvenient documents, I gotta say it strikes me as somewhat naive. On a recent episode of my podcast, even attorney Glenn Greenwald expressed some hesitation about the process, saying that he probably would not have felt totally comfortable, to be honest, with the way the Twitter files were done, because he's not willing to be manipulated by the possibility that people are handpicking what they want him to see or don't want him to see.
I probably would not have felt totally comfortable, to be honest, with the way in which it was done. In the sense that they were the guardians of the information, and the only information that you end up getting is information they decide to give you. And I'm not willing to kind of be manipulated by the possibility that people are handpicking what they want me to see or don't want me to see, because that can end up causing me or putting me in the position where I'm unwittingly serving as a spokesperson for an agenda that is not mine.
All right, so all of this buildup brings me to the ongoing hearings on the Twitter files. Initiated by Republicans who are now in control of the House, the intent of the hearings was ostensibly to force the public to pay attention to what I agree has been important reporting and to reckon with the liberal bias at play on social media sites. But the hearings took a somewhat different turn. Testimony revealed that the Trump administration routinely asked Twitter to take down posts they objected to, including a tweet from way too online model Chrissy Teigen, in which she called Trump, well, I'll just play the clip for you.
On September 8th, 2019, at 11:11 p.m., Donald Trump heckled two celebrities on Twitter, John Legend and his wife Chrissy Teigen, and referred to them as the musician John Legend and his filthy-mouthed wife, unquote. Ms. Teigen responded to that email at 12:17 a.m., and according to notes from a conversation with you, Ms. Navaroli's counsel, your counsel, the White House almost immediately thereafter contacted Twitter to demand the tweet be taken down. Is that accurate?
Thank you for the question. In my role, I was not responsible for receiving any sort of request from the government. However, what I was privy to was my supervisors letting us know that we had received something along those lines or something of a request. In that particular instance, I do remember hearing that we had received a request from the White House to make sure that we evaluated this tweet and that they wanted it to come down because it was a derogatory statement directed towards the president.
They wanted it to come down. They made that request.
To my recollection, yes.
I thought that was an inappropriate action by a government official, let alone the White House. But it wasn't Joe Biden about his son's laptop. It was Donald Trump because he didn't like what Chrissy Teigen had to say about him. Is that correct?
Yes, that is correct.
My.
I can't repeat what Chrissy Teigen tweeted, but imagine grab him by the blank, followed by a synonym for tookus, followed by a word for a female dog. As one former aide to a senior Trump administration official told Rolling Stone, it was strange to see when all of these investigations were announced because it was all about the exact same stuff we had done when Trump was in office. Per the Rolling Stone, in interviews with former Twitter personnel, one-time Trump administration officials, and other people familiar with the matter, each source recalled what could be described as a hotline or tip line or large Twitter database of moderation and removal requests that was frequently pinged by the offices of powerful Democrats and Republicans alike. Now, to be clear, the secret censorship by the government exacted via social media accounts is an issue no matter what party is doing it. I'm not as dismissive as the man in that clip was about how, well, we're harping on the Hunter Biden laptops. The Hunter Biden laptop was important. But it's worth asking whether Twitter Files journalists were sufficiently skeptical of Elon's motives and disclosures, and whether in exposing legitimate truths via their reporting, they were also useful idiots for Elon's own political project. Should they have asked more questions about their access to the files and whether it was truly comprehensive? Lawyers who withhold documents in a legal context often must produce what are called document logs, detailing what is in the documents that they are not disclosing, so the other side has a chance to contest the legitimacy of those non-disclosures. Was there any vetting of Elon's document searches or any understanding of what he might have withheld that is inconvenient to the narrative that the Twitter censorship disproportionately hurt the right? Now, Taibbi's response at the congressional hearings has been somewhat flip. He tweeted that there's nothing new here, that in the first Twitter Files dumps, he reported that there have been requests from the Trump White House, and that he showed that agencies like the FBI sent spreadsheets with thousands of names to block at a time. And look, Taibbi's absolutely right. He did disclose that in one of the first tweets in the first Twitter Files thread. But Matt's framing of the Twitter Files has clearly indicated that Twitter influence was disproportionately from the left. And while he reported that the Trump administration has made censorship requests, he didn't really detail those requests at the same level of detail he spent describing the Biden administration's request. Listen to him describe his search methodology and the results here in this clip.
A lot of people have been critical of the Twitter Files in this project because they think that we're quote unquote cherry picking or showing only one side of things. Just to give you an example of how this worked, like I ran searches for Yoel Roth, the lawyer Stasha Cardile, who it turns out I think it feels like she was running the company. Like everybody seems to be deferring to her, even lawyers technically ahead of her. There was a policy director named Lauren Culbertson. So I picked all the senior officials, and then I ran a search for DNC and RNC, right? On the off chance that there were also requests coming in from the RNC to get rid of stupid pages. And it didn't turn up that. Like what you get from the DNC is just this pile of requests to get rid of mostly really stupid things, like, you know, people saying hey, Republicans, go out and vote on Wednesday or whatever it is, right?
Yeah.
But you know, occasionally it's something like this where it's legitimately a parody, and they have to take their time out and explain to the DNC that, you know, we don't do that. You know, this is like speech, and they're not understanding that. On the RNC side, I'm not seeing it. Instead, what you see from the RNC are these constant letters saying, we're going to sue you if you keep doing this kind of stuff to us. So in other words, whether it's because the Republicans didn't think they would get away with it if they wrote to Twitter, or whether it's because there was a genuine difference in how they viewed this kind of thing, there just wasn't a flip side to the story where you're seeing similarly stupid stuff coming from the Republican side.
So on one hand, Democrats are making document requests. On the other hand, Republicans are threatening to sue if they don't pull down, make censorship requests rather. On the other hand, Republicans are threatening to sue if they don't censor certain documents. Is that really a meaningful difference? Moreover, I have some other concerns. His search terms, as he described them there, are clearly flawed. It could be that emails from left-leaning Democratic officials that wanted to censor tweets were directed through the DNC and therefore turned up when he did a DNC search. But if Republican requests weren't centralized through the RNC, say they came directly from the Trump administration, then the term RNC simply wouldn't turn up hits. Look, designing comprehensive search terms is a legitimately difficult task. It was one that I was paid a significant sum to carry out for years as a corporate lawyer. So I by no means mean to beat up on Matt for perhaps doing so inartfully. But between unsophisticated search criteria and the lack of transparency around what document trove these searches are actually even being applied to in the first place, I think it's somewhat irresponsible to make, at this stage, such strong claims about the political bias that's allegedly proved by the Twitter files. As one Twitter user wrote in response to Matt Taibbi after yesterday's hearings, they gave you some information, held from you a lot of information, then you proceeded as if you had unfettered access and wrote what now seems as a highly subjective account. I think they pulled one on you, to be honest. And in response to criticism that he should have reported on the Teigen request specifically, the Chrissy Teigen request, Taibbi responded, "I didn't see it and don't have it. I was, however, told by sources there had been requests from the Trump White House, which I reported even though I didn't have the actual text." Okay, but reporting credulously on just a piece of information fed to you by an obviously self-interested CEO, that's exactly the problem. That's exactly the problem that Glenn Greenwald identified when I asked him whether or not he would be willing to act as one of the Twitter Files journalists and why he expressed some skepticism about his willingness to do so. To be clear, I fully believe it's likely that Twitter has a liberal bias. But I also think the most important part of this story is that the rich and powerful are able to censor the rest of us, regardless of what their political orientation is or what ours is. Unfortunately, it's not clear to me that that's also Elon Musk's priority. And I hope that going forward, given the importance of this reporting, that the Twitter Files journalists are keyed into the possibility that Elon's interests as CEO of Twitter and their interests as investigative reporters do not perfectly align. All right, so I've been beating this drum for a while, but a lot of liberals were capitalizing on the kind of new revelations about the extent to which the Trump administration had made these requests to say, ignore the Twitter files, they lied about the bias, this is stupid, this is a nothing burger. And we saw that a little bit in the AOC segment we watched.
Yeah, I thought it's frankly sickening to see a sudden interest from journalists like those at Rolling Stone.
Yeah.
Like, oh, now we care about this because Trump made some ridiculous request.
Yeah.
Which I take your
point. They set it up. They set them up to run with the ball like that.
Taibbi said that Republicans had made requests and Trump had made requests. I don't totally disagree with you. The same level of detail, of like laborious detail, has not been done by Twitter Files people on exactly what the Trump team was doing. Although some of this gets confusing because like a bunch of the FBI requests we're all objecting to are done under the Trump administration.
Sure.
So they're not, again, it's not all, even what we're all kind of objecting to isn't necessarily partisan, it's deep state type intelligence people.
Yeah, the blob is
but I read the Rolling Stone story, and I think it's actually characteristic of some bad journalism I've seen from this magazine in the first place. It's all anonymous sources. It's all, people, who knows, that they're supposedly talking to in Republicans. But if you read closely, what they're saying is that, and you mentioned the threat of the lawsuits, it's mostly, the Republican requests are mostly threatening behavior in response to stuff of theirs being taken down.
Sure.
Where they're saying, how dare you take this down? So I'm not saying, I also think that's improper. I think the communications between government and social media needs to end entirely, whether it's the FBI, the CDC, the White House, Republicans, et cetera. It's improper. But I think there is something slightly different character, even if it's also improper, between Democrats, the FBI, et cetera, saying, we want this content taken down. How dare you leave it up?
Look,
and Republicans saying, please leave our content up. Stop taking us down.
Maybe there is.
And in the Rolling Stone story, it says that characterizes most of the Republican opposition.
And maybe there is, and that's fine. I said, I think three times in this radar, I think it's likely that Twitter had a left bias. That's not really my problem.
Yeah. A liberal bias, not even a left bias.
A liberal bias.
Yeah.
My problem is that if the reporting that's done isn't also exposing the ways that these institutions have hurt other people like the left, then it's incomplete reporting. And when you look at what Matt Taibbi says, he says, well, yeah, I reported on the fact, I was told that there was this trove of Trump requests, and I reported on it, but I didn't have it. That quote that I used there at the end of the segment, I didn't have it in my possession. Well, okay, so you're telling me you were made aware of that there were documents that showed that the Trump administration was making these kinds of requests. Those documents were not disclosed to you. You reported on it in a summary fashion. You just passed on that information without having firsthand knowledge of what it actually was, and didn't feel the need to do any more investigation into what the nature of those requests were, and to request more files along those lines. That is exactly the kind of thing that people are now accusing him of journalistic malpractice over. And again, I don't mean to beat up on him. I think that he's a wonderful journalist whose contributions to the field are innumerable. And people make mistakes, but this is exactly the kind of concern I've been raising the whole time, that it is very, very easy to be selective about your document disclosures.
Sure, but I don't think that maybe people are drawing the conclusion from reading these Twitter files and other things that, though this is evidence of some massive bias against conservatives, I don't think Taibbi and the others are actually making those claims in anything. They're showing you actual documents. Unlike now, I'm sure the Chrissy Teigen request actually exists, but we're hearing this. Like in Rolling Stone, anonymous sources are telling us there were all these kinds of requests. With the Twitter files, we can actually we're seeing. Like, you can't argue that email isn't real, right? It's real.
Yes,
we see it.
But we're only seeing some documents. So again,
so I agree with you.
Taibbi says he's told about these Trump requests, but those aren't disclosed to him.
Yeah.
So why aren't we seeing them? And why doesn't Taibbi and some of the other Twitter files, I don't have to focus this all on Taibbi, but why do the Twitter file journalists as a whole not demand more transparency in those kind of documents? Look, people have their own political interests. I personally wouldn't be as obsessed with something that hurts Republicans as something that hurts leftists, because I'm a leftist, and obviously people, that's completely fair. But then to go ahead and make representations like Matt has done and others have done, that he just hasn't seen the bias against the left the way he sees bias against the right, when he clearly, by his own admission, didn't even request follow-up to look at the documents about what the Trump requests were even about. He shouldn't have made those representations. He has been making representations that the bias goes one way, as we saw in that clip.
Yeah, I guess I agree with you that one ought to be very careful about making generalizations about the direction of things like the bias. When you're only seeing a fraction of and they admit they're only seeing a fraction of the emails, and that it's hard to see everything. It's so many documents.
Yeah,
it's
it takes
hard to
time.
specific things.
Law firms spend millions of dollars.
Maybe there ought to be more caution with respect to that.
Yeah.
But they are showing us actual evidence, incontrovertible evidence of some really bad stuff because we're seeing actual documents.
Yes. No disagreement there.
And the mainstream media only cares if Trump got mad. Their interest begins and ends with Trump did something kind of dumb.
Yeah, and I think I asked
which is so telling and so disgusting, frankly.
Well, the last time we had some Twitter file journalists on, I think I said to them, look, do you think that if there were more ideologically diverse journalists or an investigation into files that were more convenient for liberals, that the liberal press would take more interest in the story in a way that would actually elevate all of the information.
Or if this is all an advertisement to give Briahna access to the Twitter files, I am all on board with that.
I'm happy to look. And I think that the positive benefit of this would be more mainstream coverage of all of what the Twitter files has uncovered, and which I think is important.
Yeah. All right, we are not done talking about this subject today. We're going to discuss with actually one of the Twitter files journalists, Michael Schellenberger, a bit later. We'll have more Rising right after this.